am the creative director and co-founder with Joe, who's over there, of of a company. There's the end of my talk. Of Inkle, this company, these guys, Inkle. And we've been around for about a year, and we make interactive stories. So far, we've been working mostly with book publishers. We're not really in the games industry at all. Sort of helping them to, well, mostly talking to them, because publishers like to talk a lot, and they actually do things much less. But we've been talking to them about how you create interactive reading experiences, how you use reading and you use interactivity, and you make something engaging and engrossing. So I'm going to occasionally skirt close to Alex's territory of text adventure stuff and the kind of things he was talking about in the panel about platforms. But we're sort of a little bit different. We kind of run in parallel, I think. So we're very interested in reading. So reading is a key way of getting information out of things and into your brains and your imaginations. It's a good system for it. Pictures are good too. I'm not going to diss it, but reading is quite good as well. So that's kind of where we've been at the moment. Some of you, I hope, will have seen our Frankenstein app, which was out in April. And very badly. Sorry, I'm just going to get cracking. All right, they can just visit the website on their phone. Gosh, how exciting. I feel like I'm about to explode. Yeah, so what was I talking about? Oh yeah, we made the Frankenstein app. Now, I would hope that some of you have seen it, because that's nice if people have. We were lucky enough to have Apple feature it and put it on the front page of the App Store when it came out. And it's an interactive novel. It's not really a game at all. I'll talk about it in more detail a bit later. This isn't really a product pitch or anything. In fact, I wasn't really sure what this was going to be. I kind of organised it with Mark, and then we didn't really talk about what I was going to talk about, and then it turned out I had an hour, so I thought I ought to do something. So I kind of asked around, and Alex, again, who's a very nice guy, suggested the topic of talking about the future of adventure games. And that kind of appealed to me, because it's quite an interesting question, and it's nice to stop and think about this sort of thing, and actually look ahead, and not like look one step ahead, but don't try and look a few more steps ahead, and say not what's the future of adventure games tomorrow or next week, but in 3 years' time, or 5 years' time, or in 10 years' time, if things go really well, what's the thing that we'll say, that's an adventure game, but our kids will say, that's not an adventure game, Dad, that's a something else. How can we actually push this kind of thing in, and create something that we can genuinely call innovation? I thought that was a good idea for an hour's worth of talking. Because I do think adventure games have a future, and I think they've got a strong future. And in fact, I think that the thing that's going to happen next in adventure games is going to define the basis of this thing that we're going to call interactive storytelling, which is going to be big, and it's going to be familiar, and it's going to become normal. And I think that it's the little step that adventure games are about to take, and that's what I kind of want to think about. Also, that means I'm going to criticise adventure games, because you can't evolve without punishment, right, without being hurt. Which means I'm probably going to insult everyone in this room at some point. So I'd like to apologise for that in advance. I mean it constructively, I've got nothing personal against you, and I've made my fair share of things that I would declare to be mistakes. So it's not that I think I know how it should be done, I'm just going to pretend that I do. So if that's not a grand enough introduction for a talk, then I don't know what is. So this is the feature of these games. So I'm co-founder of Inkle. Before founding Inkle, I was a lead designer at PlayStation's Cambridge studio. Lucky enough to work in a concept group looking at AAA game ideas. So rather than actually working on games themselves, although we did do a bit of that, we looked at a lot of concepts. And that meant I got to think a lot about types of gameplay, types of market, different kinds of play, different kinds of games. And none of them were adventure games. Because according to the industry, as we all know, adventure games are dead, and they've been dead for over a decade. They're starting to smell slightly. So what we did was we made other things. Instead, we made an interactive soap opera. We made a space game about a stranded astronaut, both of which sound oddly like adventure games, but they kind of weren't somehow. We made a strategy sim about saving the planet, which we had to abandon because marketing wanted to use real climate data. So they could say so on the box, but when we did use real climate data, we made a game that no one could win. So we had to ditch that. And then finally we made a game which actually got through to being produced, which if you've worked in the console industry, or if you know anyone who has, is actually quite rare. It was a new IP and everything. It was called TV Superstars, and it was about being a reality TV contestant. I mention it whenever I do a talk because I keep hoping that I'll find someone who's actually played it. No. So I haven't broken my duck on that one. I almost included an image, and then I thought, actually, I don't want you to go away with one thought, which is Jon Ingold. He's that guy who did TV Superstars. So I'm just going to move on with that. So that's my experience in console games. But I don't want to dwell on that too much because I think console games are dying. I think they're on their way out. They've got huge budgets, and they've got, what, 10 franchises that are successful, and they keep making them. But they've boxed themselves in very effectively and very lucratively by focusing on 3 mechanics, focusing on jumping, shooting, and driving. And there really is only that many combinations of jumping, shooting, and driving that you can make. And they know it. And a little bit later in my talk, I intend to prove to you that they know it, and that it's the adventure game people, it's us lot and them lot, who have the solution that these guys are actually looking for. They're just too proud to actually ask you to come and work for their studio. Because the thing about games is they're totally defined by 2 questions. Every game you've ever played, ever, apart from the ones which are like Fruit Ninja, where you join the little circles together, or Tetris, where you put the blocks in order, which are different. Any kind of game which is sold as a narrative type experience is defined by 2 questions, which are who are you and where are you? And once you know that, that's how you write the box art for the game, that's how you make the game, that's how you design the mechanics for the game. And if you steer clear, or you avoid those 2 questions at any point in your game design, you'll end up with something crap. For example, in Bioshock, who are you? I'm not really sure if you were in Bioshock actually when I got to the end of it, but I know where you are. You're in this wonderful underwater city, and occasionally you have to rewire little plumbing things with bits of tubular pipe, and that was where the game broke, because it was nothing to do with who I was aware of. Better put, the questions are, what are you doing, and where are you exploring? Those are the 2 key questions. Every concept that we looked at Sony fits that 2-line pitch model. You know, if you're a soap opera, you're a teenager, and you're in a small American town. And the game is, well, what are you doing? Well, you're making friends, you're making money, and you're having arguments, and you're exploring this small American town, and that was the limit of the game. So if it's interesting, great, and if it wasn't, then it got canned, which it did. And the space game, you're shooting aliens, you're fixing machines as you explore an ancient crash site or whatever. And in the simulation game, you're saving the planet. And the space that you're exploring is an idea space of future green technology. So you're working your way from fusion reactors and wind turbines into wind power generating walrus farms, or whatever it is that might save the planet once we try to get off the real climate data train in a desperate attempt to save that project. And the thing about adventure games is they're great for these 2 questions, because you can do anything and you can explore anywhere. And that's because adventure games aren't about jumping, shooting, or driving. In fact, they don't really have any mechanics at all. They just have verbs. And there's a lot of verbs in the world. So an adventure game lets you dive into a world and just move around in it, and touch it, and smell it, and get to know it, but also manipulate it, and adapt it, and work out the interconnections between it, and find how this thing and that thing interrelate, or the reasons why this is made like that, or this is built like that, or that bit's fallen down, or that character's angry with that character. You can come to understand things because you've got a lot of verbs for exploring and interrogating that world, none of which you can do if you are jumping, shooting, or driving. And in adventure games, the incidental environment, the one that you see on all those screenshots, on all those game websites, matters, which it doesn't in console games. A tree in a square isn't just a piece of scenery, it isn't just another piece of cover that's this wide and this tall. It's important because you can climb it. When you climb it, you can see over the wall, and when you see over the wall, you can see there's an old well inside the fortress, and then you can realise that you can get into the sewers, maybe you can get through, and you can get out into inside the fortress, and that's how you break in. So that tree is significant, it's part of your story of how you played this game, the narrative that you told. It matters. You play Uncharted, it does not matter. Even if it blows up in a pretty fireball, it doesn't matter. So adventure games let you do this kind of deep interactivity where you get into a game and you really start pulling it around and pushing it around and making pasta out of it, and that's kind of cool. They're not the best game form for truly interactive worlds. They're okay, they're not the best. We had this panel on the perfect adventure game platform that kind of touched on this. I'm very clear on my answer to it. Adventure games are okay. The single best is absolutely, definitely the text game, there's no doubt about it. You will never find a better system for creating an interactive world. The reasons are really obvious, in that you can describe anything, anywhere, on any scale, and you can change. You can do a space opera that turns into a dialogue screen, that turns into an explosion, that turns into a series of bacteria moving around, that turns into a thought process, that turns into an investigation of grief, and then becomes dialogue and goes back again. All in within the space of 10 turns, 12 turns. You can't do that in an adventure game. You can't do it in a console game. Text is really good. It's been around for thousands and thousands of years. People kind of sneer at it, but actually we read it all the time. There are problems, obviously, and I will come to that. But anyway, I used to write a lot of these things. I still dabble occasionally. And I won't talk about that then because Alex is here from Quest, and I know he will talk about it quite a lot. The other thing that's important about them, though, that I kind of wanted to raise is the imaginative effort of turning text into a game world and into an input. So when you're playing a text game, everybody's memory of it is, well, I just want to bloody get that guy to shut up. So you type shut up and he doesn't understand it. You type hit him and he doesn't understand it. You type this and you type that. And what you actually have to do is translate the thing you want to do into the command set that the text game has got, and then put it into the game, which is very satisfying when it works because you've done a load of imaginative effort already, so you're invested in it working. So when it does, you feel like you've achieved something, which is a strange game mechanic, but you have to do some weird hard work in order to get a sense of reward, as opposed to just being rewarding and easy to use. So I think text adventures have range. I think they have depth. I think they're colourful. But they're also really hard to play. And of course, because they were hard to play, and because they were clumsy, and because parsing is difficult, and the UI is difficult, and typing is sort of careless, and people make mistakes, and nobody even implemented a spelling correction back in the day with text adventures, which is kind of obvious, really. They evolved, as things do, and they evolved into Monkey Island, which is a literal translation of a text adventure. It's got verbs, it's got an inventory, it's got a map that you walk around, it's essentially built on a grid. It has dialogue, which it does better than most text adventures. Key idea, it has things in the room you can interact with and things in the room you can't interact with, the hotspot concept. In a text adventure, of course, that's fine. You can interact with things which are mentioned in the text. If they're not mentioned in the text, you can't interact with them. In a picture, that's a little bit more tricky, and you have a problem to solve, a new problem of how do you know what's interactive and how do you not know what's interactive. And people butt up against that instead of butting up against the ability to type. But otherwise, I think they're very, very similar. Some people like pretty pictures, some people like prose. But I think the hotspot thing is interesting because if you relate it back to console games, you start to get a sense of what it is that makes these interactive worlds that we want to dive into and enjoy and explore and really experience real. And it's the ability to interact. As soon as you have a background like the tree in Uncharted, you can't interact with, it's not really there. Players sort of wander around bumping into things, and when they can do things, they remember them, and when they don't do anything, they kind of drift away. So in this setting here, probably in a few turns, I'm going to remember that there's some dudes there. I think I remember the guy with the parrot. I might remember the clock, but I'm certainly not going to remember the incidental doorways because I didn't do anything. They weren't really there. And console games are pretty barren. When you work as an actual designer on one, you build these lovely grey box models for the designers, and you just make cubes and squares and rectangles and things, and there's like 3 objects in it. Huge map, 3 objects. And you give it to the artist and it comes back looking incredible. But the reality is it's still just 3 objects in a sort of lumpy paint box landscape. So that's a real problem. It's a real problem because the world is interactive, it's gorgeous, it's lush, and you want to be there, and then suddenly you don't quite know what to do, or what's going to work, or what's going to be able to let you do something, and you kind of get stuck, and then that world gets difficult to interact with. But it's still better than what we have in the popular landscape at the moment. So for example, you know how there's, I think there's a Game of Thrones game on Facebook at the moment. You kind of go, oh wow, Game of Thrones, I'd love to go in that world, I want to experience that world, preferably not get killed and raped straight away, but I want to go into that world, because it's an awesome world. And then you turn it on and you find out it's just Farmville with castles, and you kind of feel dirty. You go, oh, I'm sorry, I even looked. And they'll get a hit off me. I don't want to get a hit off me for building Farmville with Game of Thrones on it. Like, surely we can do better. I want to go into the world of Game of Thrones, and maybe you do as well, but Farmville doesn't do that. It's not solving that problem. So what is the thing that solves that problem? So that's kind of interesting, because adventure games kind of, they get close to that, don't they? If you put a little bit of effort in, you just imagine them as being a little bit more fleshed out than they are. And with text games, the same, you put in a lot more effort to imagine them, but they start to get this feeling that maybe you're actually there in a real way. you've got that setting to explore, and you've got something to do. Those two game ideas, which Farmville doesn't touch at all. Anyway, after Monkey Island, obviously which everyone in the world has played, they got a bit better, and I do think this is better. This is a shot from Ribbon, which was the sequel to Myst, which really was a world you could wander around in and breathe in. It was a very empty world, rather than full of combination locks dotted in odd places for no good reason. But it had occasional moments of real genius, little moments where you just come to an understanding about why something was built the way it was, or why the culture was like it was, or how things worked, and there was a cute bit of some basking dinosaurs swimming in the sea, and just little things that brought the world just to life, just for a moment, more than it had any reasonable expectation to be allowed to be, sort of more than you thought it might. It just came alive just a little bit. It was very, very immersive. And it was simple. It was really simple. And actually the puzzles were quite hard, but walking around in it wasn't hard at all. You could wander around and get lost in it for ages. That was a perfectly good way of using it. You know, so shooter games can offer adrenaline, and RPG games have realms of backstory, but to get to that you have to plough through all this stats and levelling and grind, but really anyone can pick up Ribbon and wander around, and they don't have to solve a single puzzle, but they get the sense of it. If they solve the puzzle, they'll get a bit more, but if they don't, they'll walk away and they'll still go, that game was beautiful. I don't know what it was, but it was beautiful. And the same is true to a lesser extent for things like Discworld and Broken Sword, classics of the Wimbledon era from the 90s, right? They had that. They would just throw that first puzzle in much, much faster. So your shareware, if you like, before you invested your brain was a lot smaller than in a game like Ribbon. But at some point, puzzles comes along and they lock away. And they say, look, time is going to stop, it's just going to stop passing. Nothing is going to happen in this world until you fix that broken door, you pick up that box, you get that guard to go to bed. And things grind to a halt, and that's really bad, because either it's a puzzle that you can't solve, you just don't get it, or it makes no sense, or it never did really make any sense, and they only threw it in because it was 11 o'clock at night and they didn't know what to do. Or worse, it's quite a good puzzle that you cheat by going on the internet, and then somehow there's this shift that your interactive world with characters and things and agency turns into a series of hoops that you're jumping through, and some of them are sensible and some of them aren't, but the answer is always out there on the internet. There's one answer. It's just sitting there. The game's just sitting there with its arms folded going, no, no, until you tell it what it wants to hear. It's like the worst ever driving instructor. It just sits there, no, you got that wrong, you got that wrong, that was all, no, you got that wrong. And then it's drive everybody. He's a very nice man, by the by. No, that's the game about driving, and no jumping yet, and no shooting. Anyway, so the great thing about adventure games is they don't have any mechanics. They just have these verbs, so you can do things. But the terrible thing about adventure games is they don't have any mechanics. So you can't learn anything, and most of what you learn gets thrown away. You figured out that puzzle, great, forget it. Now here's the next one. Most of the best moments in most adventure games and text games are the ones where you learn a puzzle here, and then it was relevant later on, because you got to learn something and keep it. The sword fighting mechanic in Monkey Island is just a dialogue tree, but where you learn something and it's relevant. Oh, genius, amazing, brilliant. Why? Well, because you get to actually repeat and learn and sit in this world and have just a few moments where you do the thing that you know you need to do and it works and it's good. And that's the experience we want, right? We want to foster that experience that you do things and they work. We don't want to make the game pointlessly trivial, but actually getting you stuck, actually having this series of single challenges to get through is not that good for anybody, really. So, at the point when you get stuck, the two key questions, who are you, what are you doing, and where are you exploring? What you're doing is wandering around randomly, and where you're exploring is this bloody, broken thing. And that's a failed condition from a design point of view. So I know people in the console industry who would say, okay, yeah, there's no way back from that. Adventure games are dead, they're over, they're gone, forget it. But that's not true. They're going to come back, and they're going to come back in quite a big way. They're just not going to be quite the same as they were. So here is my prediction. I have a series of little predictions that I've made. And my first prediction is a nice, safe one, because it's not very specific, which means I can claim credit for any good ideas that anyone has. Adventure games are going to evolve. They are not going to be quite the same as they were yesterday when they are popular. I don't think I score any points if that's true. But I want to talk about that in a little bit more detail. Now, I think there are two key reasons why that's going to happen. And the first one is this. This is an undeniable fact. And God bless the console game industry, but they spent their money proving it. they've proved to us that there is a demand for interactive stories, and also that they don't know how to fulfill that demand, which is brilliant. They've done our R&D for us. They've gone out into the world and they made some shooting games. They were like, you know what, if we put story and characters in this, it'll be better. So they kept on doing that, and they kept on doing that. And you end up with games like these 5 at the bottom, all very big sellers. Assassin's Creed, if you've played it, is a sort of sprawling RPG, which has a very small amount of actual assassination in it, which is kind of odd. It's about 30% of an adventure game. All the best bits are running around and collecting things and talking to people. Those are the best bits. When you talk to people, you kind of go, can I just have a bit of a... And occasionally it gives you a button to do the thing. There's a triangle to kiss the girl. If you don't press it, he kisses the girl anyway, because they're not that creative, I guess. But yes, it's first and second, there's lots of other things you can do to make this job. Uncharted contains puzzles with machines and codes and riddles, and again, tons of dialogue. And in fact, if you play Uncharted, have people played Uncharted? A few, surprisingly few. Okay, well, it's a platformy shooting game. It's Tomb Raider, but a little bit slicker. But the weird thing about it is you do this great interactive story with these great characters, and they're really witty and it's battered and it's beautifully shot. And then he pulls out his gun and it goes all robotic and computer gamey. It's like they take Uncharted away and they put Pac-Man in front of you and say, just fucking do that for half an hour. And you go, oh, do I have to? They don't even say anything very witty. They repeat themselves. All the AI stands up straight. The worst bit in Uncharted is the bit where you're in a cutscene and it blends into your control. And Nathan Drake's loping along and looking really charismatic, and then suddenly he stands up like a robot and immediately walks off a cliff because I was clicking on the forward button and I didn't notice. That happens all the time because Uncharted 1 actually was a shooter platformer with some jokes, and Uncharted 2 was a hybrid, and Uncharted 3 is an adventure game with irritating shooting and jumping mini-games in it. And they know it. They absolutely, definitely know it. They're trying to patch this over the whole time. You look at the game design, every time a bit of shooting comes in, they just sort of go, well, maybe we can just put a little sliding block puzzle in there or something, just to make it feel a bit less crap, because they're embarrassed about it. But they know it sells, and Sony won't let them do anything differently. Which is to say, if you can make Uncharted without the jumping and the shooting, you've nailed the market that they've built for you overnight. Genius. All you have to do is make less than they did. Fantastic. Heavy Rain, of course, is entirely an adventure game. And so is L.A. Noire, except the bits with the cars and guns that Rockstar just don't know how to remove from their code base. So that's the first reason why I think adventure games are going to come back in a big way. There's a demand, there's a market, it's right there, and it's not being satisfied. People play Mass Effect 3 and they go, oh, I really enjoyed the choices. And so what about the shooting? And they went, well, I got through that. Remember what you used to say when you played text adventures? Oh, I really like the story. What about the parser? Oh, well, I got through that. Well, what did we do? We threw away the parser. Well, we're going to throw away the shooting. That's my prediction. And we should do, because America needs to grow up. The second thing is tablets. It's hardware-based, it's obvious. Tablets are an amazing device for playing adventure games. You can curl up on the sofa with them like you would with a book. They're slick, they're clever, they're glossy. They're built around the idea of poking things to see what you can make happen. That's fundamental to how tablets work. You tickle them and prod them, and they do things. That's the adventure game mechanic. If it has one, that's it. It's you poke stuff. Adventure games are also lush when they're done well. Riven is a lush game. Probably isn't if you put it on an iPad 3 actually, but probably blocky. But finally, they don't need introduction, they don't need tutorial, and they don't need precision inputs, like a shooting game does. People have tried to put shooting games on tablets, they don't really work very well. Adventure games are nice and fuzzy, they work beautifully. But tablets don't just support streamlined experience, they demand streamlined experience. And people get confused on tablets ridiculously easily. I think it's because, Joe and I were talking about this morning in context of another project, I think it's because they're so glossy that when you approach a tablet, you want to press the right button, and if you don't, you feel really stupid. You don't feel like the tablet's broken, you feel like you're just a bit rubbish. The only parallel I can find is it's like for me when I was younger and I was talking to a very pretty girl in a bar, and I have this pressure to say the right thing. And if you say the right thing, great, but if you say the wrong thing, it's your fault for being an idiot. It's not her fault for being socially awkward and making you feel like an idiot. Never, no, not ever. It's always my fault because she's pretty. That's how that works, right? I have the same relationship with my iPad. So there's a key part of the adventure game language that's missing, and it doesn't translate to iPad. It just does not translate. This is the point where people can actively get annoyed with me if they like, because I know a lot of people have spent money and time making it translate, but it will not translate, and that's context. Tablets do not give you context. They do not have mouse over. They never will have mouse over. Any solution you have for mouse over is not the right solution. There's lots of adventure games where you scrub around to get the icons pop up and you press the icon. You tap the thing. It's just all trying to fix something. It's trying to paper something over. The PC model is you find out what's going to happen, you take a decision, and then you do it. That's how PCs work. That's how they've always worked. That's how mice work. Tablets don't work like that. They say, do something, and it better be the right thing. And when it is, it goes, great, you did really well. That's a one-step interaction. You have to get it right every time. You're not allowed to do a research step followed by an action step. That's how PCs work. We're not in that universe anymore. We simply don't have the headspace because we don't care that much. We just want to get on and play our game and read our book. So that's a good thing, though. That means the idea of searching the environment for those interactive bits, for those hotspots, for those words in the text that work opposed to the words that don't, the stuff that's really interactive, finding it. We can't search for it, so we shouldn't. So we need to do something else to get that problem out of the way. I did a search on Google for pixel hunting, because I wanted to say, look, we have to put an end to pixel hunting, and that's a good thing, and this is what I found. And I don't think it means the same as what I thought it meant, because I think this is a guy trying to see pixels on an iPad 3, and I think it's marketing, but never mind. You can't pixel hunt on a tablet. You never can, you won't, we shouldn't. It was a bad idea in the first place. So, what does that mean? Well, that means, I think, that someone is going to come up with something that feels as natural as mouse over felt on a PC, that requires no instructions, that no one that I've seen has done yet. And when they do, it'll unlock adventure games, not for you and me, but for casual users, for people who like their tablets but don't really like games. We just want to get on and do stuff. When we find a way of showing people what they can do in a way that they can do. Because this is UI, this is just UI. It's not game design, it's not story, it's not character, it's nothing that we can geek out about really, but UI is the technological battlefield now. Hardware is a solved problem. It's a solved problem. But UI isn't. That's why Xbox beat Sony. That's why Apple beat Xbox, because they had better UI for everything, consistently. People trust Apple, not because Apple made good products or because they're nice people. They are neither of these things. But we believe that their UI will be usable, and that's actually what we care about most. No one. But this is the point where I'm really talking about the future of adventure games and not next year adventure games. Because of course the reason that UI is like it is in adventure games and in text adventures, as Alex pointed out, is that we're working on technology that's been around for a very long time. I've never, Adventure Game Studio, is that what it's called? I've never used it myself, but it sounds to me like it hasn't had that development process, that technological push to push the UI up. And certainly in the text game world, where I've been for a long time, no one was working on that problem. They weren't interested, because it's not a very rewarding problem, because it just keeps on changing, and it's hard, and you get it wrong a lot, and you have to test it a lot, and in the end you don't have a game, you've just got a system. Who wants a system? I want a game. So I don't want a game. But we've got to do this, so when we do this, we'll make an experience that's on a tablet that's as enjoyable as you intended it to be, and as the user wants it to be, given that they spend all this money on a tablet. So that's my first thing I want to say, and that's my first sort of real proper prediction, which is there will be a new paradigm designed around tablets. It won't use cursors or compasses. I doubt it will use icons, I may be wrong. I think it'll use gestures. I think it'll use gentle highlighting, a bit like console games do with glows. It may use parallax in a clever way, but I haven't really thought that through. It might be first person. When it's done, it'll make games feel like we're browsing through a world, touching it, altering it, shaping it as you go, but without getting horribly lost all the time or having the camera get stuck behind a door somewhere. It may be 3D, but I doubt it. The closest I've seen so far is this, which is The Last Express, which is Jordan Venture's game from the mid-90s, I think, which was just ported to iOS a few months ago. If you haven't got it on your iPad, go and get it. It's really, really, really good. It's ridiculously good. It's a real-time game. It has an in-game clock that never stops. The characters move around, they have conversations. If you're not in the room, you won't hear the conversations. It's beautifully written. It has some puzzles as such, but they don't feel like puzzles. They feel like things in the world. There are rooms you need to get into, and the door's locked because, of course, the door is locked, because people lock their doors. But you can get in a variety of ways that you could do in the real world, and pretty much anything you think of will work, so long as it's sensible. And I don't really want to spoil the best puzzle in the game, which is how you get into the compartment of another passenger on this train, because it's so good. But if you'd like me to spoil it, come find me afterwards and I'll spoil it, because I can enthuse about that. It was glow. It's superb. It's also, on the iPad, I haven't played the PC version, on the iPad, it's hideously, hideously broken. This is a screenshot from last week. I'm not sure if that's very, very visible. I wonder if I've got time to, how are we doing time? I might just boot it up actually, since I've got it. So the way they've decided to implement the mouse over problem is this hideous mess of, the soundtrack is also fantastic. This hideous mess of cursors and arrows and magnifying glasses and hands, and it's kind of done as a series of first-person pixel panes. And as you turn around, it's never quite clear how the different panes fit together. So, for example, this is me in my car, and I can turn, okay, I'll go forwards, and then I'll go into here, and it starts to become very difficult to work out if I stop. I think my carriage is the one at the end. Isn't it gorgeous? So if I go in there, I think I can. Okay. So, and I'll turn around, and then the question I'd like to ask you is, how many doors does this room have? That's your mission, okay? I'm just going to move around like a normal adventure game player would. Just tapping the buttons. How many doors? 2? 3? There's one there, there's one there, there's one there. Oh, but some of you might have noticed that that one and that one are the same. But look at this screen, just look at it for a moment. I'm a tablet user. I've got 2 side arrows, an up arrow, a down arrow, 2 fists, 1 other fist, and a magnifying glass, and I don't know which door is which. This is like going and meeting that beautiful girl in the bar, and she's talking in German. I don't stand a chance. It's knackered. This is the only game I've ever played where I've managed to not get lost within a city or within a building, but within a single train compartment in the first 10 minutes. But it's so close to being brilliant. This game is so close to being absolutely superb. So please, download it, play it, struggle through it, work out how to fix it, do it, and then pay me 10%, okay? It is really the best game I've played all year, even though I can't pretend to anyone that it's not. It isn't. It should be, but it isn't. So, that's my first call to action. You need to make a UI which makes sense on this form, because this is the form and we've never had a better one. And if we pass this one up, then we all deserve to just go home and cry to our game books. Second thing, like all good win conditions, the future of adventure games, which is very bright, requires 2 keys to unlock it, not 1, and UI is just the first. And the second one is this, and this is the one that I'm genuinely passionate about. That one I just care about, this one I really care about. We need to do something about this. We need to do something about doors with complicated locks. So classic adventure games are a sequence of doors with very complicated locks. You solve the lock and you open the door, you go to the door, and the doors are often metaphorical. They could be making someone like you, or finding the object, or getting the bucket off the top of the shelf, or whatever it is. I don't really have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with plots in which there's something that hasn't happened yet that you need to do in order for the next thing to happen. That kind of sounds like storytelling to me. The problem is that the locks have only got 1 key. That's a huge problem. Because as a writer, as a designer, it's very easy. You go, lock, door, key, lock, key, lock, key, lock, key, lock. And maybe you have a couple of parallel branches and a bit of interweaving, that's fine. Very easy for me as a writer to do that. I can bust one out a page in a day. It won't take very long, it won't be very good, but whatever, I've done it. As a player, it doesn't feel like that at all. I turn up in a world, and I see a door, and I see a whole load of locations, and objects, and characters, a whole load of opportunity. And I don't know what to do. And because you, when you were writing it, were a monomaniacal story thief who said, I am the only author in this room, I'm the only one with any creative imagination, what I say goes, you can have an idea if you like, but it's either wrong or it's mine. That's the setup that adventure games offer you. They say, be me or be crap. So it's a bit like, I don't know, it's a bit like trying to be a plumber or something. You can get the manual and you do it with the manual. You can try and work it out and make it up. But eventually, either you flood your house or you could have just got a plumber. It's easier when you're playing an adventure game to get the designer to sit next to you and show you the game, because then you get all the story and all the satisfaction and all the ooh-ah moments without the hassle of not knowing what to do. And that's not a very good state of play. That's not what we should be aiming for. Because the problem is very simple. If we treat stories in adventure games as linear flows with linear solutions and linear interactivity, then we are making our games hard, and we cannot avoid that. You will not be able to make an easy game with a linear plot unless you make your solutions trivial, at which point they aren't puzzles anymore. As soon as you have a puzzle, if you have 1 solution, your game is harder than if your puzzle has 7 solutions. That's obvious, right? Because there are 7 random things the player can do that will get them through that door. Classic example is L.A. Noire. Did anyone play L.A. Noire? Okay, great, brilliant, a few people. So it had this interrogation mechanic, and somebody would say, whoa, I kind of liked him. And you'd have to guess, are they lying and telling the truth, or are you somewhere in between? And if you click the right one, the game carries on and you do well. And if you click the wrong one, then the scene ends and stuff goes wrong. As opposed to, this is a game that no one ever replays because it's too long and clumsy. They could have just made all 3 answers work. If you say, oh, he's telling the truth, well done. If you say, oh, he's lying, you're right, he was lying about that detail. Or he's somewhere in between, oh yeah, that's true, he was a shifty character. Oh, well, you did really well. I'm not saying they should do that every time, because then you don't have a game, but they never did that. So the game was really hard, because you had to get it right, 1 out of 3 every time. Okay, so 1 in 3, that's not bad odds. You get some information from the way the character acts and clues you've seen, so that maybe ups it a bit. Maybe you get a 60-70% hit rate. And then you play that 400 times in the course of a game. How many times do you get it wrong? Not 30% of the time. Exactly. Exactly. If you did that in a console game, apart from LA Noire, bizarrely, the game wouldn't pass QA. It would be declared that this is too hard, players don't know what they're doing. Especially if they get stuck and they don't really even know how to tackle the puzzle. At least LA Noire says pick a button. Like most adventure games don't say that. They say, there's some stuff. In console games, they bat it back. They'd say, sorry, you need to tell the player explicitly what they're supposed to be doing next. Because that's one of the regulations for console QA processing. The thing is, there's no reason to do this. Like, we did it in the past because we had to make the game fit on a floppy disk, and we needed to make it last a decent length of time. If you nail through Monkey Island, it's long, but it's not that long. But when I played it, took me like 3 years. And that's because it was full of random bits and there wasn't an internet. We need to be looking at the way console games handle this kind of interactivity, because they do it really well. They, you know, if you want to get past a guard, what you do in a 3D game, well, you rush him, or you create a distraction by setting fire to something, or you slip behind him, or you hire the thief from over there, or you find another way you can beat him. And all of them are valid, and all of them are fine. Whereas in the adventure game version, you have to show him the photograph of his dog, which makes him cry, and then you give him a handkerchief, which makes him cover his eyes, and then you can slip past. And if you don't do that, then it's trainers at a nightclub time, you're not getting in. So, my second prediction is, and I think this is obvious, multiple solutions and paths will become normal. I've seen lots of reviews of adventure games that say, oh, it's got some multiple solutions as well. That's the wrong way around. It should say it's got the occasional linear solution. Multiple solutions are obvious, they are natural, and they should be normal, and we need to cope with that. We need to start thinking in a way that copes with that. The hardest thing about this is keeping track of what the bloody hell is going on as a writer, because they might have done it this way, they might have done it this way, they might have done a bit of that and a bit of that, and then gone over here and done a bit of that, and you have this horrible consistency problem. Like, when you get to the other side and somebody says, how's the guard? And you go, well, he's upset about his dog, or he's dead, or he's run off to sleep, put the fire out, or I clubbed him on the head. You've got to deal with that. You can't contradict yourself. Well, okay, let's cope. Let's just rather than let's man up, let's woman up and cope and sort that. So, for example, you need to be able to bring things back together. So if you attack the guard, he runs away to hide, fine. If you try to charm him, he'll leave his post to go and buy you some flowers. Either way, he's not there. So that's consistent. And either way, when you meet his wife, she'll be furious. So that's consistent. We never meet the guard again. We don't have a consistency problem. We have multiple solutions conveniently, trivially. That's twice as good as a single solution. And it isn't even difficult. So this is my mantra. Wibbly scenes, wobbly story. I originally said tiny whiny scenes, but then I thought that was actually not quite what I meant. The scenes of the game, the moment by moment, the minute by minute, should go all over the place. They should be freeform, they should be creative. Players should be able to invent stuff, and if it's sensible, it'll work. And if it's not sensible, it'll tell them what the sensible thing is. They should all be like that. But the plot needs to be wobbly. And wobbly is different than wibbly. Wibbly is like this. Wobbly is like a tent. It kind of flexes a bit, but it doesn't fall over. It doesn't blow off in the wind. It's just wobbly. It can cope. It's the bamboo from Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. It's fine. It's good. It's got cheek. We need plots that are just flexible enough not to break when the player does something differently. Like every console game ever has a plot which is a complete railroad, but it doesn't matter that you went this way, or you went that way, or you went over the rooftops, or you went and swam, or you hired the hitman. It doesn't matter. The plot just copes. Well, that's easy. Let's do that. That isn't really hard. People get really precious about this one, I found, especially publishers. But like in Indiana Jones, great film, Indiana Jones, there's that bit at the beginning with the guy with the sword going, he pulls out the gun and he shoots him. Classic moment. But it doesn't actually matter that he does that, as opposed to legging it through the crowd, or throwing dust in his eye, or getting help from his lady friend, or using a basket, or any of the other 100 ways that he escaped from the same situation for the rest of the film. That one's quite fun, but it's not exactly critical. So let's branch. Yeah, okay, 10% of your players will see the really cool moment. Okay, they'll tell their friends, and their friends will go, oh shit, I'm going to have to replay it now. What's the problem? replayability is really about people talking to each other. It's not about an individual player going through and farming a game repeatedly to see all the actions. Or it shouldn't be, because we want people to talk about our stuff, because then it is. So Last Express does this a bit. It has quite a lot of branchiness, but it does tend to end prematurely unless you choose the correct way. So it's only kind of half and half of it. So this is the kind of stuff, like I say, I get really passionate about. Wibbly Scenes, Wobbly Story, and this is what we've been doing at Inkle. So our first app was Frankenstein. It's not a game at all. It's written by a game book author called Dave Morris. And he took the novel and he adapted it into our engine as an interactive dialogue between Victor Frankenstein and the reader. So Victor Frankenstein turns up and says, "Hi, how are you? I'm doing this thing, do you want to see it?" And you can say, "Well, you know, Frankenstein, I'm not really sure that's a very good idea." Or you say, "Yeah, Frankenstein, bring it on, this sounds awesome." You know, and as you're reading, you're telling Frankenstein what you think about it. Good idea, bad idea. Maybe you should try and save the creature. Maybe you should kill the creature. Maybe you'll help him, maybe you'll hinder him, maybe you'll confuse him, maybe you'll try and get him to at least sort out his relationships with other people while he's doing this thing, or maybe you don't care about that. By the end of the story, Frankenstein will trust you, or not trust you, or like you, or dislike you, or lie to you, or deliberately not do the things you ask him to do because he's annoyed with your suggestions. He won't not build a monster. The monster will definitely kill people, but the way that it happens and the colour of the text and the style of the story is different depending on how you read it. It's what Wibbly Scenes and a Wobbly Story. It's not, again, I'm not going to pretend that it is. Yeah, and it's got choices. It's kind of it looks like a choose your own adventure, though I would argue that it isn't really. But most of the choices don't control the story. They control the moment. Because we live in the moment and the story is something that happens to us. Because as players, we don't want to control the story. We want to be in the story and be affected by the story. So we poke it and it pokes us back and we have a whale of a time, hopefully. I thought of a nice analogy the other day. It's the difference between sailing a ship in a storm and pushing a toy boat around in a bath. The storm is much more exciting because you're not in control. How many time? I might not show Frankenstein here just so I can bust through a few more things to say, but if you want to see it, buy it, or come and see it and I'll show you if we've got on the iPad. The thing I wanted to show you from it though is this, which is the graph. We showed this everywhere we go, so it's kind of cool. This is Frankenstein. This is the entire novel of Frankenstein. Each one of those white blobs is a page. The little blue lines are how they link together. The red blobs are just there for the computer to tell it that a chapter is ended. All the chapters don't necessarily end in the same event. They just have a little bit of wax on the bottom to tell the game to go back to the index room. As you can see, chapter 1 is pretty linear, actually. There's a bit of blob around the end where you talk about things, and you can do that in lots of different orders. By chapter 5, or is it part 3 or something, it goes nuts and breaks straight away at the top into 3 parts, and they wiggle around all over the place, but they do eventually collect back up again. So lots of wibbliness, very little wobbliness. The other thing that this graph doesn't show, which is that every single one of those pages is not fixed either. The engine underneath is able to rewrite the text on the fly, depending on what you've done. So we change what pages link to what pages, where they go, how they connect, but we also change what the contents of those pages actually is. So this is why text is really good. I can do that. If my character's been a bastard, I can change the text to make him a bastard. If he's nice, I can make him nice. I can do it really cheaply, and I can do it more than you if you're making a graphic adventure. But that's a solvable problem. Text is good for now, because as Dave said in his talk, you've got to make things within your means. And design is within our means, and it works, and it's cool. So let's move forward. So, moving forward, indeed. That's probably what we're going to do next, is how do we move forward? Well, the first thing we did is we thought this is a good idea, we should get it out there. So we made a tool. It's a website called Inkle Writer, that's the web link, if you care to go to it. And it's for writing interactive stories. You write into it, it's got choices, you link, it can track conditions, test things, it's got a little map to show you where you're going. It's quite fun, you can share them with a link, it's all free. A few game devs are using this to do scenario design for their games. They write the scenario, and then they export the data, and then they load it into their game engine, and they've got a way of making this kind of wibbly-wobbly structure in a very, very user-friendly way. Maybe about 1% of our users. Most of our users are in schools. Teachers seem to love it. They put 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old kids in front of it with no tutorials. Generally, the kids know how to use it better than the teachers do. And they write little stories, and that's cool, and that's nice. And if that makes 1% of people less frightened about the idea of wibbly scenes, then that's a win for me. And occasionally they share them, and that's kind of cute. So Inkle Writer is there, and yeah, we like it. But Frankenstein and Inkle Writer are very much book-focused projects. So what we're looking to do next is moving something that's a little bit more gamey, but building off that idea, which is what was on the bit of paper that said who I was. So thank you for coming, because that's probably all you knew about who I was, and that's why you came. And we're doing an adaptation of this, which is a game book by a chap called Steve Jackson, who in the 80s was one of the UK's most prolific game designers. He founded Games Workshop, he founded Lionhead Studios with Peter Molyneux. He's a very nice guy. And he's letting us adapt this series of 4 books. They're 4 game books. That's kind of an epic journey across this dark fantasy version of Nepal. And you sort of fight monsters, and you cast spells, and you solve riddles, and you collect items, and you avoid traps. And it's got a lot more of that kind of game structure to it. It is still sort of a book, or there's a book in there as well, but there's all these other mechanics. And originally they were done with sort of dice and things. And what's really nice about this adaptation is Steve is letting us reinvent the whole thing from the bottom up. So in the game book, the fighting is done by throwing dice, and there's a system of counting points. And I'm going to insult some more people in the room, I'm afraid. I find that dice on iPads don't work very well. I've seen better solutions and I've seen worse solutions, but I've not seen many which make me feel like I'm genuinely doing the thing I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be fighting a creature which is going to kill me. And what I do instead is I look at some numbers, which then affect some other numbers, and I keep doing that until one of the numbers hits 0. And I can imagine that that's a fight, but it's hard for me. So what we've done is we've tried to say, what should this be like? Well, what am I doing? Well, I'm attacking, or I'm blocking, or I'm defending, or I'm swiping, or I'm parrying. What's the monster doing? Same thing. What's the important thing? Who outwits who? So we've come up with a mechanic which is new. I've never seen it before, which is nice. And it's sort of a mixture of rock, paper, scissors, the classic hack and slash mechanic, and the prisoner's dilemma, which is where you have 2 people and they have to make a choice. And you might there was a viral clip from the TV show Golden Balls recently, which I recommend watching. It's like the prisoner's dilemma, Golden Balls. The first clip you'll get is this video. I don't know what the second clip would be. Anyway, so you've got this mechanic, and it's kind of integrated into the text. You write the text as you play. So it's genuinely an attempt to make a different kind of way of creating the same idea of with text you're using. And it's very cool, and it's very interesting. This thing will be out in March. We're doing a bit with the spell casting. In the original book, there was a set of 50 spells you had to memorize, and then there were just options with the names of them. We cannot make an app where we say, learn these 50 spells before you start playing. And once you've done that, we're going to take them away and you never see them again. I'd love to be that guy, but we can't do that. So we're probably going to adapt that quite simply, actually. Yeah, we need to work out what the right balance is to make sure that it doesn't just feel like a minigame, because that would be bad. You want to feel like a magician. So you want to feel like you're calling powers up and using your knowledge and your lore. How do you do that? Well, probably not just pressing 1 of 6 buttons, probably. But you probably don't want to have to make sweeping gestures either, because you know what, you're not a magician. You don't want to feel like you've got it wrong. So this is our kind of list of features. But the key feature, the feature at the top for me, and not actually for Joe, my co-founder, because he's more of a visual guy, is that it's an interactive fantasy novel. This is my attempt at It's Game of Thrones, but you get to be there. Well, it's more kind of David Gemmell, actually. The novel is rewritten on the fly as you play, depending on what you do and the choices you make, and the character you develop, and the items you've got, and the routes you took, and who you met and who you didn't meet. Like last night I was thinking about it, and I realised that in sort of chapter 5 there's a plague village you can wander into if you're unlucky, and you can contract a plague, and there's this poor family there who say, we've been thrown out of the villages because we've got plague. And you go into the next village, and they've got this waterfall of magical healing, which if you go to, removes your plague symptoms. I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning going, crap, there's a waterfall that could save the plague victims. Why don't they do that? Well, actually, because we're doing a rewrite, and Steve's okay with it, that's going to be an option. If you found the plague village and find the waterfall, you can save the plague village. Yay, a little bit of extra thing in there. Just a little thing we can throw at it. It's nice, it's quite cute. We've got the ability to make sure bits of novel come in or come out, and then we can feed that in later, and we can change your character based on it. We can make this a series of episodes which you drove. And I think that's quite cool and quite interesting. And I don't really think it's a game book. I think I said earlier that I don't see this as a choose your own adventure, because I don't really think it is. It's an interactive fantasy novel, which is different. And I hope it will appeal to a slightly different market, or at least a slightly different mindset. When you're playing a game book, you are solving a maze. You look forward, you reach a dead end, you backtrack, you go a different way, you map it out in your head, and you haven't finished the game book until you can picture the whole damn thing, which is really hard to do when you're reading a computer. It's possible if you use paragraph numbers so that people have reference points, which we don't. We just use text. So we need to do something which isn't a maze. Actually, we're doing a little bit of a maze element, because we've got to have a map in there as well. It's about a journey, so it should be focused around a map. So we're kind of borrowing that element that you get in a lot of graphic adventures, of the kind of the location map, moving forward and showing you the journey across the geography. So that's quite an interesting balance to be striking, and I'm quite excited about it, and trying to get this kind of wibbly wobbliness in with this kind of graphics stuff. Yeah. So that's what we're doing. This isn't the adventure game of the future. If any of you fell asleep for 15 minutes in the middle there, this is not my product pitch of the next big thing. This is going to be awesome. You should play this. You should read this. I'm super excited about it. And then the thing we do after that, that's going to be even better. And the thing we do after that is going to be even better. And the thing after that is going to be even better. And unless one of you dudes or someone else pips me to it, eventually we're going to end up making the super awesome interactive adventure game that everyone says, that's not an adventure game, Dad. That's an interactive graphic novel. Because that's what I want to make. Because I think that sounds awesome. If you don't want to make it, but if you do, come so, to wrap up, thank you very much for listening. I've talked for a long time. This was the first slide that came up when my iPad was in the wrong place, so here it is again. Next generation adventure games will be tablets-based. They will be smooth and seamless. They will be unget-stuckable because there will be so many options and way forward. You might not know quite how to get past an obstacle, but you will never not know where the obstacle is, and you will always try 3 things, and eventually the third will work. And you'll always be moving forwards, and you will never have to throw it against the wall and go, what the fuck is up with this thing? We're not making IQ tests anymore. And it'll be massively micro-branchy. It'll have to be to satisfy the requirement above. That's, I guess, the point I really want to underline. That's the thing that I care about. We have to be massively micro-branchy, otherwise it's get-stuckable. You want to make a game people can play well, you need multiple solutions. You can't do it any other way. But whatever these things are, they might not